All right, everybody. Nice to see everyone. I guess you're just seeing me. Today I'm speaking with Ali Divan. Ali Divan is a Ph.D. in medical sciences from Texas A&M Health Sciences Center. And since then, he's served as a staff or senior scientist in multiple companies, including BioLegend and Truvian. And since last year, Ali has started his own company called Trulitica, in which he helps life scientists, mostly life sciences PhDs, to transition into industry, and more specifically, biotech industry. So welcome, Ali. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Keenan. What an introduction. I think maybe I just need to have you introduce me everywhere I go.
That's my new thing that I do. I'm becoming famous for good introductions. No, you definitely deserve a good introduction. I like everything you do. Everybody who is not following Ali on LinkedIn and his posts should follow him. In any case, Ali, I mentioned just a little bit of your background. So PhD in medical sciences and then working in a couple of companies. But if I go through your LinkedIn, there's a bunch of experiences on working with different companies. Take me through the journey, from how it started with you in science to how you got to do what you do today.
Yeah, it's sort of a different journey. I didn't think I would end up in science. I was very business and economics focused in my undergrad, and then I ended up getting a chronic illness at that time, and had to take some time off to recover. Thankfully, I did recover, and my experience with it helped me see how little we knew about medicine. I think in my head, I was like, yeah, we got most of this sorted out. I was young, I was kind of ignorant about this. And then when I went through the experience, I was like, wow, there's so much we don't know. And now I kind of want to figure that out. And so I had a good why. So when I went back to undergrad, I completely changed majors from business and economics to biochemistry. I went back to a different school and just started over and learned everything I needed to know, and thought I wanted to go to medical school because I liked this sort of idea of having one-on-one interactions with people and helping them very personally. When I ended up volunteering at clinics and seeing what the day-to-day life of a healthcare provider was, I realized that it didn't match up with what I had in my head. It didn't seem like something that I wanted to pursue. What I really loved was the puzzle of the science and focusing deeply and figuring out how do things work. And so at the last minute, I decided that instead of going to medical school, I was going to apply to a PhD program. And I've kind of always been unconventional in my approaches to things. So I applied to Texas A&M in this particular lab I'd read the PI's papers as part of a journal club in my undergraduate program, and I really liked the work that she was doing. And so I applied after the deadline, and I basically just bothered her over and over again, saying like, "Hey, I really want to work for you. I know it's after the deadline. Is there anything you can do?" And I think after I bothered her enough, she realized that I was serious. And um, long story short, they made an exception for me. I used my MCAT instead of taking, because I hadn't taken a GRE. So I used my MCAT and got into Texas A&M that way. So I will just tell you that I spent the 5 years of my PhD focusing on the disease that had affected me long ago and discovering some new things about it and being really proud of that. And that was cool. And so, when people say research, me search, I think there's some truth to that. If the strongest why is a personal why. So I ended up thinking I was going to go down the professor route, the academic route, and went and did a postdoc at the University of North Dakota based on having met a PI at a conference and having clicked with her really well. So that was in a microbiology lab there. I spent about a year there, and unfortunately, we ran out of funding. And so I needed to find a different role. For me, moving was not an option because it was just too costly. And I had two toddlers at the time. And so, you got two little kids running around. You're not getting paid very much as a postdoc anyway. And sometimes you can't afford to move. And so Thankfully, I was able to find another lab at the same university that was doing really compelling research on metastatic prostate cancer. And so I went to that lab, and it was my role there was sort of this hybrid role where I was working on cell culture. I was also working on high throughput screening of small molecules, and ultimately ended up going down this route of chem informatics, which was completely new to me at the time. So I spent about 9 months there, and during that process, I actually it was a little bit more than 9 months, but during that process, I'd applied to so many different grants and responded to so many reviewer criticisms and objections, um, and ended up kind of finding out that the reason that my grants weren't getting funded didn't have that much to do with the science. It had more to do with the pedigree, like my track record, like, oh, well, you haven't published as much. Oh, you haven't um, been in these high impact journals. Oh, your institution isn't well known for this thing. And I remember getting on the line with a program officer and saying, hey, I don't really know what to do about these criticisms. And her response was, well, you're on your second postdoc already, and you only have this many publications, and your science is good, but you're competing with other people who have the same quality of science and everything else. And I asked her, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And she said, I don't know. And to me, that was an indication of, well, you know what? Thank you for telling me that. I think it's time for me to go somewhere else. I think the academic path, because of the requirements, because of how competitive it is, and because there's nothing you can do after a certain point, um, I think it's time for me to go somewhere else. And so it was at that time that I decided, okay, I'm going to focus on industry. And that began a whole other journey, which I'm happy to talk about if you want to hear more about that.
Of course, that's quite a remarkable journey, and I like that in both instances where you were talking about getting into an academic position, which is something I focus on rather than industry. It had to do with kind of networking. So in one case, you met the PI at the conference, and in the other case, it was persistence and really demonstrating to this one person that I'm really into this, and this is my why, and I'm the best person for your lab, and you should hire me. And that even led to an exception. I really love those 2 points in the story because sometimes when I work with students, they forget that when they're applying to these academic things, and I guess as you progress, these kind of things that you mentioned, like the pedigree and the number of publications, they all become much more important. But I guess in the early stage, it's much more about, can you convince this person that you're the right person for that job? So, and students very often forget that they're actually talking to other people who are professors, who happen to be professors, postdocs, whatever. But
Mhm.
it's kind of shrouded in this mystery. There's this committee of people, and they are, holding hands in a circle, and they're, ruminating whether to take this person or that person. But in the end, it's just people, and you need to convince them that you're the right person for the job. I love that example that you gave there. Okay, so
Thanks.
you have a strong why, and I think is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I like this uh, part where you mentioned that where the science was good, but it just maybe wasn't enough of it because
Hmm.
other people maybe have stronger collaborations. Maybe their centers are well, supported. They can just call someone and have them team up with them, and they just, shoot out 5 publications a year, and therefore now they are the ones who are stacking up in the top of that hierarchy. How much do you think luck plays a role in these publications, like from start to finish? So from identifying the right research question that can actually, produce something, and then getting lucky with some results, because sometimes, sometimes it's
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
lucky. And then, in all of this process, let's say from PhD on to getting a professorship, how much do you think luck is involved?
I think it depends on how we define luck. I don't think that there are people who are unqualified, or I don't think there are people who are bad at science who end up doing well in science. I think
Mm-hmm.
that the people who do well in science are generally good at science. The question of luck comes in the form, I think, of probability. And so my perspective is that we have a very, very high number of excellent scientists. In some, depending on whose numbers you're looking at, sometimes 20x, 20 times more scientists who are skilled and excellent scientists than there are roles available for them as tenure track faculty in academia. And so suppose you're all 99% qualified. How do you make a decision on who's going to get this? That's where I think luck comes in, where now you are talking about your pedigree. You're talking about who do you know? How good are your relationships with your, quote unquote competitors that are in the field? Do you really have a niche carved out? And that niche that you carved out, is it highly funded? You can be the best scientist ever if there's $1 million, $5 million in funding, and there's 100 PIs competing for that. They're not all going to get it, and so I think
you just have to mention the microbiome, and then you're gonna bump up how much money you can get for the grant. No?
Yeah, and maybe like, and if you're in the if you're on the industrial side, just say something about AI, and then you're good to go. But yeah, and so I think luck does play a factor into the trajectory that you begin on, because as a graduate student, how would you know what's going to be important? I mean, I can just talk about my own experience that everything leading up to graduate school, all I had to do to be successful was to study and try. Like, all you had to do was try, do your homework, study, try harder, try harder. There was never this idea of strategy. There was never this idea of resource scarcity. And so I would have never even thought about looking at the big picture and saying, okay, where is science headed over the next 5 to 10 years? Where are NIH dollars going? Which of those things translate readily into industry, if just in case I need to make a pivot? You never think about that. You just go to a PI's lab and you go, oh, I like them. They're really cool. Oh, they're nice to me. Or, oh, look, they got a publication in Nature 5 years ago. I'll be famous if I work for them. We don't really think about where is that heading. And so I think that there is this sort of bias in with respect to especially some of the older generation of PIs, where they ended up on this track where they were doing science that was really compelling and highly funded. And for them, they do work hard. They work very hard. They're working sometimes 60, 70-hour weeks. But for them, they don't understand what everybody else is complaining about. They go, well, just work harder. What do you mean? That's what I did. But the landscape has changed, and they haven't experienced what it's like being on the other side of, well, I did the exact same thing as you, and I just ended up in a field that's not well funded and not that compelling compared to what you're doing. And they kind of just don't get that. They go, oh, we'll just try harder and you'll be fine. And so there's a little bit of a survivor's bias there.
I think it's very interesting point to bring. The other day, actually, there was a meeting at EPFL here in Lausanne, in Switzerland. Some professor was talking, and he's about to retire. He's an established professor, and somebody asked him, how long are you going to keep going? It's been a while. You've had success. You've had publications. You've had great students, and he's like, I think I'm going to use the option where I just keep working until forever. And just that directly ties to how competitive everything is, because every year number of PhDs is just going up. I don't know what curve does it follow, but it's going up really fast. And there's just these professors just the number of spots just keeps staying the same. And some of these professors are not making it easy because they won't leave, which I can understand from their position, because they developed this field, they established, that's what they do all their life, they love it. But then again, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's fossilizing the science a little bit in some cases, but it definitely can happen. So why I bring that up is because I think what you do and what people like Elena, who I had on my last episode, do, trying to help people transition to industry and to other paths, alternatives from academia, I think just makes it much more important. So
Mhm.
maybe tell me about, post academia life that you had. How did that
Yeah.
go? I see you have a lot of different experiences. Were they all similar roles? And in the ones where you have, quote, the same role in the company, did you end up doing the same things over and over again, just in different companies, or how did that go for
Yeah. So getting into industry was really hard. And I think the reason it was really difficult was because the people giving me advice, the people who were giving this career advice or resume advice or interview advice, none of them had actually done the thing. They hadn't gotten into industry. And so a lot of it was based on, I think, a maybe a fantasy of what it would like, maybe a stereotype. I'm not sure. And they were all well intentioned. And I'm talking about individuals within academia who were trying to help me. They'd say, "Oh, well, do this to your CV, do that to your CV." But that's what you would do to your CV if you wanted it to be effective in academia. And they're fundamentally different cultures with different practices. And so I just wasn't getting good advice. And I kept doing all the things and not getting even one phone call back. And I ended up reaching out to a PI who I'd helped her write a grant at a different institution, and she got the grant awarded. And she had at one point said, "Well, if you ever, I kind of owe you one. If you can read anything, let me know." So after spending months applying and just feeling so beat down, I called her and I said, "Hey, do you know anybody?" Because she was over in New York, way bigger area. I said, "Hey, do you know anybody who can help me? I don't know what I'm doing wrong." And I had tried going online and getting free resources from all these other coaching companies, and it just wasn't helping. And so she put me in touch with one of her colleagues who was very senior in a company over in New York. And he looked at my resume and all my stuff, and he was like, "This is so wrong. Who told you to do this?" And I told him, like, well, this, not by name, but like, well, people in this sphere at some coaching companies that were doing this and that. And he's like, "Yeah, this is why you're not getting any calls back. This is pure fantasy and delusion. This is not how you present yourself." And so he spent two phone calls just kind of helping me figure out, like, okay, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, frame it this way, build your network. And then the rest I had to just put the work in. And eventually I did get interviews. But every mistake you can make, I have made. Like, I promise you that. And so eventually I did end up getting an interview at BioLegend, and continuing to run with that. And by the time they called and made me the offer, I'd forgotten that, like, I just assumed that they weren't going to give me the offer and that they just moved on, because I think like 2 months had gone by since my final interview and the job offer. So I was shocked. Like, and the way that the recruiter said it, he presented it like it was going to be bad news. Because, well, we looked over this and that, and yeah, we want to offer you the job. And I was like, "Wait, what? You want to offer me the job?" Like, yeah. And so it was just the craziest thing, Keenan. Over the course of 2 weeks, I think it was 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, we got up and we moved and sold everything with two children under the age of 3, my wife and I, and moved in the, like, just before the North Dakota winter, which is like one of the coldest winters in the contiguous US. Just before it had set in November, we moved across the country and found a place to live in San Diego, a place that we'd never ever been except for when I interviewed with BioLegend. And we started our lives here, and it was just such a huge risk and such a bold move, and we had no idea what we were doing. But we were like, you know what, this is the only way that I'm going to be able to build a future for my career and help our family. And my wife was awesome about it. She's always been so supportive. So that's how I ended up in industry. Now, what that was, and again, that was just the beginning of the journey. So that's where I got to learn about all these things that I didn't know, all these acronyms, all these words, how people communicate, how people think. The mindset is so different. In the industrial world, there's a fundamentally different relationship with time. So,
What do you mean?
very
What do you mean with
often,
that? Sorry, what do you mean
I'll
with?
explain.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'll explain. So, very often in academia, we'll do journal clubs, or we'll do like weekly lab meetings or something like that, where it's scheduled for 1 hour, and it's not unusual for it to go longer. Someone's giving a talk and they're going longer, and if the PI's got something to do, they'll say, "Okay, well, I got another thing. You guys keep going." And then sometimes you'll sit there for an hour and a half, and then you'll like eat pizza or something, And in the industrial world, like it's unprecedented to have a meeting that lasts 1 hour. It almost never happens. That's so long. Usually meetings last like 30 to 40 minutes. And if you finish early, if you finish 5 minutes early or 10 minutes early, that's not bad. That's good. People go, "Oh, awesome. Cool. Thank you for being so effective with your communication. I have time to go get a coffee before my next meeting, or I have this other thing I have to do." And so it's just less is more in the industrial world. Um, the other thing is that generally you don't call meetings unless you have a very, very clear purpose. You need to have a problem statement. Like, why are we having this meeting? And in terms of who's being invited, they need to be essential to the meeting. You don't want to just invite people for audience members, because the more people you invite, the more comments and questions you get, and the longer it takes. And those people, if they're not critical, now you've pulled them into something that's pulling away from productivity. It's pulling away from something important that they need to do. The related concept here is, I think, being concise and being smart with your questions. Part of the PhD training, especially in Journal Club, is to ask as many questions as possible, be as critical as possible, and always find holes in the argument. And that's very, very important for our training. It needs to happen. If you can't do that, then you can't think about a problem correctly. I think our training is incomplete though, because after you master that, the next step is to learn to stop doing that and to be very strategic about the questions you ask. And the one thing I had to work on for myself was like, okay, I only get 3 questions in this meeting, so they better be good ones. And if you limit yourself, then you go, okay, is that do I want to waste my one of 3 questions on that question? Do I need to poke a hole in that argument? Is that the purpose of this meeting? Why are we meeting? If we're meeting to solve this high level problem, and I find that, oh, well, the citation that said, you said it had this many citations, but this other resource says it has this many citations. How do you know which one's true? Valid criticism, but is it relevant? Is it relevant to the problem we're solving? And so there's so much that PhDs do as part of their training that does not translate effectively to being productive, effective, efficient at work, and to being a good colleague. It's very easy to alienate people when you approach problems in this way.
That's something I definitely noticed, having been a part of a couple of labs by now, that as a part of this, knowledge pursuit, and people take an intellectual pleasure in arguing and finding holes, as you said. And then, I enjoy it as well, saying, why is that graph looking like that? It's a little funky. Maybe explain that a little bit better. But then, more often than not, I find those meetings lasting sometimes 2, 3, 4 hours. And at some point, you got to go back to the lab and finish some work, and you feel like you just want to go home now. It was a little exhausting. So I definitely see that point, and I agree that maybe it's going a little too fast. Sometimes I feel some of these discussions went on for no reason, just because people like to argue for 3 hours in a lab meeting. So that definitely a big difference there. You mentioned when you first made your CV and you applied to a bunch of companies, having no success, and then you finally get a call from this guy saying, hey, listen, all of this is wrong. Let me help you just these couple of things. You're doing everything wrong. it's hard for me to imagine that a CV can be wrong, especially you're applying to scientists, and here you also think I'm also applying to some scientists. Maybe they work for a company, but they also have some kind of academic background. What were those things that were wrong in a CV that's maybe appropriate
Happy to
for
share that.
academia?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to explain it is from a mindset perspective and a purpose perspective. So a CV, it's literally your life story. It's everything you've ever done. And it's very me focused. It's here's what I've done. Here are my accomplishments. Here are paragraphs about what my impact on science was. Here are all the professional committee societies I've been a part of. Here are all the awards I've received. Here's all the grant funding I've received. It's almost the way I imagine it is if I were running for a pageant of most wonderful professor, I would use my CV to prove how accomplished I am. A resume, in the U.S. we call it a resume, and I think internet in other places in the world it's just called a CV, regardless. Um, a resume is not that. A resume is a marketing document. It's not. It's not me focused. It's you focused. You being your prospective employer. And so it's not about all the wonderful things you've done. It's about understanding what is the problem that that employer has, what is their pain point, and what do they get from you if they hire you. And so first of all, if it's 5 to 10 pages, they just don't have time. It's a burden to them. You've assigned them homework at this point that they don't have time to pursue, especially if you haven't given them a compelling reason to read it. Why would they read it? They don't even know you. They've never heard of you. And now you're asking them to essentially read an autobiography of you. Why would they do that? In a resume, if you do it effectively, usually for scientists, it can be up to 3 pages. There's this myth that it has to be 1 page. I think that's industry dependent and role dependent, but for scientists, generally it ends up being 2 to 3 pages. But the way that you use white space is so much different, and this is all marketing stuff. So you can't if somebody looks at your document and it's packed with words the way a grant is, right? If it's packed with words with tiny font and figures in here and everything's stacked up, emotionally they feel exhausted looking at it. It's this idea of cognitive burden. They go, I can't do that right now. If you use white space effectively, you can take 1 page of crammed information and turn it into 2 pages that someone will actually read. How you use fonts, how you use space, these things matter. But that's just like that's the aesthetic part of it. I don't want to give the impression that it's all aesthetics. It's not. The other part is how you're communicating. That 3-line or 3-sentence bullet point or paragraph that you've written in your CV, it's too much technical language, unnecessary level of detail. And what I often tell people to do, I say, hey, can you read out loud what you wrote for me? They'll read it out loud. And then I'll ask them, is that how you speak? They'll say no. I'll say, so tell me what you meant when you said that. They'll tell me what they meant. And I'll go, say that. Because for some reason, the way that we're trained to write is like the antithesis of getting to the point. It's like just get to the point. Tell people what they get when they work with you. And you can usually break that down into like 1 sentence, 2 sentences. And of course, you have to explain, what did you do? How did you do it? Why did you do it? And you can get that down into 1 to 2 sentences. So it's about effective communication. It's also about putting things that are relevant, because it's not everything you've ever done. It's things that you've done that are relevant to the pain point that that person has as a prospective employer. And the way you understand what that pain point is by reading the job description, breaking it down, and interpreting it. So imagine that you are selling something and they're your customer. If I were to sell you a car, I wouldn't say, hey, I spent 5 years making this car, designing it. Here's what all the components of the engine are. Here's how I made the engine. Here are all the other pieces there. Here's what some guy who drove the car one time said about me, about the car. You would just say, you know, you wouldn't go into all these features of the car. What you would do is you'd ask your, and especially if that customer doesn't even want a car, maybe they want a truck. So you would ask the customer, hey, what are you looking for? And they tell you, and then you, if you have that, you would say, oh yeah, you know, I have done this, or you know, my car does do this, it can go this fast, is that something you need? And they go, yeah. And so you frame it that way, and you make their, it's about making that person's life easier. If you can come into an organization and position yourself as, hey, you guys have problems, I have solutions, I'm going to make your life easier, you're a much more attractive candidate than, hey, you guys have problems and I'm wonderful. Completely different approach, you know.
How does one go about understanding that pain point that someone who's looking for new energy into their company? How do you understand? Is it just about reading the job description? Because to me, I feel it might be a little bit more than that. I know when I'm
Mhm.
researching, when I was applying to labs for PhDs, for a master's, for internships, the professor might list some things they would like, but then you kind of go to the lab website, the publications, you talk to the people from the lab, you talk to the alumni who are no longer tied to the lab, and you get a different picture of what that professor actually wants. Is it like that in the industry, or is it much more transparent? Can you read between the lines? And if you can, how do you do that? How does one understand that, those pain points?
I think your approach is spot on. There's more than one way to understand the pain point. Reading the job description and being able to deconstruct that is one way of doing that. It's a little bit of an art, takes some experience. I don't think I can teach it here now because it takes a lot of time and practice. But in my with my clients, I teach them that, and I also have a digital course that's self-paced. That there's an entire I think 3 lessons on it with several exercises and examples. But you're right that a lot of the time there are secret pain points that are not in the job description. And so the way that you understand what's really going on is you have to talk to people, you have to network with people, and you have to build a real relationship with them. And then once you do, you can ask them. The best thing you can do is ask them, you know, if there's anything they wish they had or any major challenges they're facing before there's a job posted, because then you'll understand the company, you'll build those relationships, you can position yourself towards it, and then when that job is posted, they'll already be thinking of you. But you're right, you do very similar to what you're describing in academia. You do need to understand the history of the business in this case. What's the funding landscape? Did they just go through a bunch of layoffs? Who, what does that business unit focus on? Because it's not as if you have a, you know, I guess in the same way that a university doesn't have PIs all doing the same thing and talking to each other. Like, you know, there are PIs you probably have never spoken to. Same way in industry, maybe not quite as isolated, but there might be a, if you're in the R&D space, there might be people in sales that you've never spoken to. And so for me to reach out to a salesperson and ask them about what R&D is doing and what their pain points are, they'll probably go, I don't know. I've never talked to them. So it's important to speak to the right person and make sure that if you're going to be complimenting them or asking them about a particular product that you're a fan of that that company makes, make sure that that person actually works on the product. I can't tell you how many times people, when I was at BioLegend and I was working like in the proteogenomics unit, people would reach out to me and tell me like how awesome the ELISAs that I designed were. And I was like, I didn't design the ELISAs. What are you talking about? You know, they would attribute, they would assume that I did it. You know, it would have been a different story if they would have said, hey, I love BioLegend's ELISAs, I use them all the time, is that something you work on? I'd say, oh no, but I know who does, and I'd send them over. But there's this assumption being made that because I was, you know, the manager of operations and product development, that I developed every product. And it's like, no way. There's so many products. How could one person do that? So
If we can
anyway,
mention the license,
that's
yeah, those were mine.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
take the
yeah.
credit. So I'm realizing that as my light ran out, and the night is kind of
Okay.
falling, so I do look like I'm a little bit in a strip club. So I will probably take out this part, but let me just try to turn and take out this towel from the window to
Go
get
for
some
it.
more light. So
Yeah,
hopefully,
go for it.
I'm feeling good is not a song that's next played in my room. Right? So,
Are you talking about the Muse song?
no, no, no. The
Oh,
Nina Simone, like, and I'm feeling good. Um,
oh,
it's
that's the
like a
same song.
don't,
I didn't realize.
don't.
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
the same
yeah.
one?
So Muse, it must be a cover then. I was thinking of Muse because Muse also sings that song, plays that song. I thought that was theirs, but they do an awesome cover
They
of it.
covered
It's
them.
so good.
Okay, I did not know they have a cover. I love Muse actually.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Look up
maybe
Feeling
this
Good
was
by
like
Muse. So it's such a good song.
awesome. So where was I? What did I want to? This is the best part.
You you you
So
had you had asked. Go ahead.
so I want to ask you. I heard one detail, a statistic, which someone pulled out of a hat. I don't know that most jobs in industry, and I think I remember a number of 85%, are gotten through networking. And
Mm.
that sounds like a lot. I don't know, is it true? But I can certainly believe that
Yeah.
because I know that when people apply to PhD positions, those that have a step advantage above other people are those who have already been in contact with the professor. Maybe they were already on an internship there. Maybe they contacted them before. Maybe they had a little interview back and forth. What could we do? But the PI has remembered their name and they are kind of a step above everybody else.
Hmm.
Would you say that the same is the case in the industry? And if so, how does one
Yes.
network for industry? How does one where do you go? I don't know where to go. Maybe I want to go to industry. I don't know
Yeah.
where to go to meet these people. So maybe give me a little crash course on how and where to network.
This is such a relatable like problem and question. I remember it saying exactly that thing. Like, was there like a conference I'm supposed to go to or something? Like, where do I go to network? So your first question, like in terms of the importance of networking, I've never heard that 85% number. It sounds kind of high. Um, I think I would advise caution on interpreting that as causality. I wouldn't say that networking causes you to get a job, but I think that there is a parallel in terms of what you mentioned about being remembered. So, networking will not cause you to get a job you are unqualified for. You won't. But if there are three people who are highly qualified, and if we imagine that they're exactly the same, the person who knows somebody at the company has a relationship with them, and that person at the company can say, yeah, I've actually talked to this person and I think I would like to work with them. That will give you the competitive advantage. And yeah, I think you have to remember, as you said at the beginning of this, they're humans, and what they if they are going to advocate for you, it's not necessarily because you have some magical skill. It's because they enjoyed talking to you. They can imagine working with you. You have something in common, or they think that you might make their lives easier. That's what makes people want to advocate for you. It's not how smart you are. So, how do you do it? There are probably a lot of methods, but the one that I advise for all of my clients and graduate students in general is LinkedIn. It's an excellent place to speak with people and to meet with people. I think that there's value in informational interviews, but I would also advise some caution around jumping right to that. I think one of the things that I've observed PhDs do is they close too fast, and it gives the impression of transactionality. So what I've seen a lot of people do is that they'll send a connection request, and they'll start talking about themselves, or they'll start talking about their interests. They'll say, "Hi, I'm really interested in this research area. here's all my accomplishments and here's my CV. I want to work there. And for the same reasons I mentioned before, I don't know you. Why would I care what your research interests are? Why would I care what your accomplishments are? I don't have time to read your CV. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean that in a I'm hungry and I have to drive in traffic for an hour and then I got to make dinner for my kids kind of way. So I'm going to make time for you if you make it easy. Like, don't make it hard on me. And so I generally emphasize the human connection and just short statements. So you can just reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, I saw you study at the same university as me. Really enjoyed being there. And I see that now you're over at this company. I'd love to connect with you." Don't ask them for anything. I'd love to connect with you. And then they may or may not accept your connection requests. I've, just sort of anecdotally, I would say maybe 30% of the time people will accept. The other 70%, they're too busy or they're just not interested, or maybe they don't use LinkedIn that much. They may not be that active. Those people that do accept, then you have a conversation with them. And that conversation, another mistake is, suppose you do start that conversation. Another mistake is to immediately say, "Okay, I want to work here. Here's why I think I'd be a great fit for this role. Will you send me a referral?" And again, it's like, "Oh, so you just reached out to me because you wanted something." So then,
On that
you
topic,
keep this conversation. Yeah,
so, on
go
that
ahead.
topic, is it so? I kind of I understand that and I like that. It's great connecting
Hmm.
with people, sharing the common passion, common goals, interests, whatever. Is it a little presumptuous, even if it's a connection request on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I'm interested in the same thing," but if that person is kind of hierarchically above you and it's kind of obvious that they
Yeah.
might have a direct interest in you, a direct be consequential in your nearby future. Um, should one do that, or should we maybe avoid? I feel a little, not that there's anything dirty in sending a connection request, but
Hmm.
does it also happen that the other person from the other side is like, this person, even though they're saying, they're trying to, establish a nice human connection. I know why they're adding
Yeah.
me. They want a job in the future, maybe not now, but in 6 months. So
Hmm.
how would you navigate?
I think that's fine. When people know that what LinkedIn is for. LinkedIn is for professional networking. If they were to knock on your door and do that, that's a different story. But given that the medium that they're using to make the connection is intended for that exact purpose, I don't think that they would be offended that somebody is reaching out to them to make a professional connection and is also involving some kind of human touch to it. And especially if you're not asking them for time, it's the time thing. I think it's the time and energy and effort thing. If somebody makes my life easy and um, demonstrates to me that they have emotional intelligence and understand the professional landscape, I'm happy to build a professional connection with them. It's not like I'm inviting them to my house later. And so I think it's not this sort of binary situation of either non-transactional or transactional. You can build a relationship, you can ask for things, but you have to do it at the appropriate time, and you have to make sure you're not creating work for someone who is not committed to advocating for you on the basis of some relationship. And you also did make a comment about reaching out to people who are hierarchically higher in the organization, and I think that's really important is to reach out to the right people, understand the department and the business unit the business unit in the company that you need to be reaching out to, understand what their title and role is. I generally advise people to reach out to people who would be in a parallel position, one level above or one level below. So don't go network with the CEO unless it's like a 10-person startup, different story. But if it's a 5,000 person company, don't go network with the vice president of R&D. They're busy and it's not relevant to what you want to do. If you're looking for a Psi 2 role, network with people who are Psi 1, Psi 2, Psi 3. They're the people who will be involved in your interview. They're the people who will influence the person hiring. So that's sort of how that works. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused in academia, is because in academia is just there's a PI. you're not like networking with people in the lab. You're talking to the PI. And so there's a little bit of a difference there.
We had a point about making a human connection. However, I heard, and I do not know much about this, but I heard that because it's also a competitive landscape to get into biotech, let's say, very often, let's say the HR departments or whoever is screening initially the CVs, they might toss the computer might be handling your CV, which I don't know when is that the case and when is it not. Are there some things that we should, how we should adapt our CV so that we are not tossed into the digital bin if a computer is handling it initially?
Yeah. This is one of the biggest misconceptions and myths that I've seen other coaching companies put out there, and I think they do it so that they can sell you something. So I've spoken with I have the benefit of having contacts in the recruiting space. One of my contacts has been in life science recruiting for over 15 years, and so many people have asked me this question that I just invited her to my community. I say, hey, can we just talk about this? Can we just get everybody in the same room and talk about this? So an ATS is not like automated tracking system. It's not like a magical robot that makes decisions. It doesn't like toss things necessarily. You can like, it doesn't make decisions. You can program it to have certain questions, and if you answer yes or no to that question, it'll automatically reject you, but you tell it to do that. It's not just making a decision. So for example, if you say, hey, we don't do visa sponsorship, and on the questionnaire it says, will you ever need sponsorship, and you put yes, you're going to get rejected. You shouldn't put no if you need sponsorship, because you're lying, and then you're just wasting everybody's time if you're doing that. That's just an example. In terms of how does it categorize and help recruiters identify the best fit, it does pull keywords and things like that. Those keywords aren't something you have to consciously think about. You don't like it. I've heard some really ridiculous suggestions of, oh, put this job description in this AI thing, and this AI thing will pull out keywords. Take those keywords, put them in your resume, but put them in all white, so a reader would never see it, but the ATS will see it and advance you. And it's like, okay, like, to what end? At the end of the day, a human is going to make the decision. Yeah, it's like, to what end? It's like you're trying to trick. It's not about tricking people or gaming some system. It's just about communicating effectively. And all an ATS is it's a form, it's a very specific application of a customer relationship management system, which we call CRM. And so it's just adding tags. And so imagine you have 1,000 candidates and you need to find, I don't know, which one of them meet 95% of our requirements. It's important to use language that's called out in the job description. But when I spoke to my contacts in the recruiting space, they said at good companies with professional recruiters, you will always get a human looking at it. The ATS just helps you make decisions. It helps you highlight and see things, but it's not making the decisions. And so I have advised people to just don't worry about that. Worry about the pain point, focus on that. Use language that's relevant in the job description. But don't go to bed thinking about the next time you got to trick a robot.
It's good, because me tricking robots is not something I've been successful with so far. I want to talk about planning, Ali.
Yeah.
I have some friends who have stuff to ask you. They asked me to ask you. All right. So, given the whole, academia being, not many positions, and many people already thinking, yeah, I'm going to finish my master's, but I'm not really for this PhD thing, or they are, on the road to get a PhD, but they're thinking, I'm just going to get this PhD just to get done with the thing, and then I want to go and make money in the industry and be treated like a human if they're in a toxic lab or something like that. So
Yeah.
Maybe let's start with, how would you go about, let's say I'm a master student. It's my friend, but let's say I'm the master student. How would I go about, planning the next 12 months if I want to get a job in the industry, in the biotech industry? When would I make, like, say, I don't know, a list of companies that I could actually apply for, and then list of people to reach out to, and how would I go about step by step?
Yeah. So I think it's never too soon to network with people. It's never too soon to make a list of companies that you follow and want to work at someday, and to start just talking to people and being very transparent. Hey, I'm reaching out to you because I see that you work at this company. I'd love to be in your shoes someday. And then they respond to you and say, "Oh, cool. What are you doing?" Well, I'm going to be graduating in about a year, and I have a particular skill set. I'm trying to understand the major challenges at your company and whether my skill set would help you either now or in the future, preferably in the future. And if it's in the future, they'll be more open to talking to you. And then you start building these relationships, and then later this job pops up, and then you already have the relationships. If you want to know my advice in terms of what's the optimal time to start, probably about 6 months before you graduate, regardless of whether it's a master's position or a PhD position. And keep in mind that a lot of this will be practice. The job offers in industry typically expect you to start within 2 to 4 weeks. Nobody's going to wait 3 months for you. And so if it's 6 months before, and you just happen to get lucky and build this perfect network, and you have a good resume and you submit it and they interview you and they offer you a job, and you say, well, actually, I'm not graduating for another 4 months, they'll say, oh, well, we can't hire you for this, but we really like you. We're going to keep you in our system. Give us a call when you graduate, and we'll see if we have anything open. So there's no harm in that. But I do find that just with the long process of hiring, sometimes hiring can take 3 months. So with the long process there and the learning curve and just all the little delays and all the steps, I think 6 months is probably a good thing to plan on. The steps are generally identify user skills to narrow down which companies are hiring for people who have those skills. Reach out to people there, build those connections, build your translate your CV into a resume. Start doing that. That process of applying and building connections and applying is iterative. That can take 3 months as well. Then you get to your interview stages, and then you're practicing communicating, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I think people can, if they have emotional intelligence, they can iterate and figure it out. And we all have emotional intelligence. I just mean, how much have they practiced it? As you iterate and practice, I think you can on your own figure out the problems and the mistakes that you've made, and end up being successful. If you want help, I think a coach can help you shorten that timeline, help you be more effective, really land that one role that you wanted. Ideally, you want to make your mistakes before you get to that one role you really wanted. And the same is true in business. Like when you start your new business, you don't necessarily want to go after that one company that's like your ideal company to work with. You want to make some mistakes first. So by the time you get to that company, you got everything solid. You got your elevator pitch, you have your portfolio, you have all your things.
And you've already maybe gone through the interview process a couple of times. You know what kind of
Yeah.
thing they're asking you, which are going to be things likely repeating themselves, I guess. One thing
Yeah.
I want to talk about the interviews and how different they are in the academia versus industry. But before that, I want to go back to my friend who is
Yeah.
almost desperate to get into industry. And her attitude surprised me a little bit because she's so smart, such a good problem solver, proactive, takes initiative, just finishes projects. Is great. Like any company would like to have her, I think, if they're, if they want to get any job done and it has anything to do with science or leading any kind of a project. And then I got really surprised that her opinion was that now if she goes into microbiology for a PhD, after that,
Mhm.
the only thing in life, if she ever wants to transition to industry, is going to be to work with bacteria. She can never do
No.
anything else. because nobody ever will take her because she has built a set of skills around microbiology, and nobody will respect me outside of that community. Can you tell me a little bit about other skills that maybe are more general that we could use as selling points as PhDs to companies that are not necessarily, I know how to pipe it and I know how to use this particular pipette. Oh no, I'm doing the thumbs up. It had to happen. It had to happen today. It was my subconscious. It never happened until today, and now, yeah, everybody. So if you put a thumbs up, it happens. So
No, it's
tell
not
me
going to do
first
it.
of all,
Yeah.
first tell me, what do you think about that attitude? Is it wrong? Is it right? Is there any truth to it? And then tell me, how should she, as I told you, she's a good problem solver and all of that. How should she present herself to a company that she thinks she lacks skills for?
Yeah. So I guess it depends on how much of this skill. What's the difference between what she offers and what they're asking for? If you're an 80% match, that's enough. That's enough to apply and to be able to have a conversation. This idea that I studied microbiology, therefore I must do microbiology, I would push back against that. I don't think that's true. In general, people are not, if as long as your degree is in life sciences, something in the life sciences, and you want to go to biotech, people are not too concerned what your degree was in. What they care more about is what have you done and what can you do in the lab, like, especially if you're applying for a scientist role, which most people in the life sciences, that's going to be their entry point. It may not always be stay in a lab role. You can go into managerial route, stuff like that, but entry, you're going to be in the lab. So what did you do is what I would ask her. I'd say, have you done whole genome sequencing? Have you done next generation sequencing? Have you done when you were working with bacteria, did any of that involve in vitro culture of mammalian cells where you were infecting them? What types of experiments were you doing? Were you doing like things pertinent to maybe a in vitro model of blood-brain barrier where you were looking at bacteria going across, some of these tight junctions? So it matters. And that I wouldn't emphasize that topic, but what I would emphasize are the skills involved in that. Were you doing media optimization? Did you do anything pertinent to sterility? These are things that matter. And so if you can say, and also, by the way, a lot of work is done in E. coli for scaling the expression of proteins. And so that's a great place for microbiologists. And yeah, I transfected E. coli and then scaled the expression of these proteins and then purified them. And then we use them in this particular context. So those are all things that I would use to those very granular technical skills. I would use those to identify which jobs are looking for those skills. And then it's not that hard of a sell. It doesn't really matter what the title is. What matters is what skills are they looking for? What skills do you have? And if you've done whole genome sequencing in bacteria and they want you to do it in mammalian cells, that might not be a big deal. You can ask them, well, do you have a process set up for mammalian cell culture? No, we need you to develop that process. That might be a harder sell. But oh yeah, we have people who do that. We just need somebody who understands whole genome sequencing. Say, okay, cool, I can do that. I've done that in bacteria. Take me a couple of weeks to learn it. Do some literature review and chat with some of my prospective colleagues. Should be able to figure out pretty quickly. So I would focus on those. The soft skills, like, they're really important, but I don't, the way you show those is when you interview. Like, I don't really like, how can you put on a piece of paper that you can write, collaboration and stuff, but like, that's just a conversation starter. You can't prove that you're collaborative on a piece of paper.
And there's a step further. My friend is at the beginning of her career. Then I have another friend who's at Harvard, brilliant guy, but he works with flies, like a very niche thing in biology that nobody seems to need because it's mostly genetics. The same thing I do. Yeah, I mean, occasionally you need a Western blot or a PCR to genotype something. You need these molecular things, but most of it is just brute force genetics, which is the power of using the fly. And he was talking to me last year saying, I'm not sure I want to stay in academia. I want to go to industry, but I don't think anybody will want me because I just worked with flies. And then I think, aren't you at Harvard? And aren't you also, you have a cell paper, and aren't you super smart and collaborative and sensible guy? Wouldn't it be surprising that nobody wants you, even if you don't have you haven't done whole genome sequencing, let's say? How would you advise
Yeah.
my friend from Harvard? Does he still have a chance in the industry? Does he have to shoot for a very specific company, or can he still apply to companies that are maybe not even an 80% match that you might?
He can try. I think it'll be a tough. I think he's right in this
Yeah.
case. That the fact that he went to Harvard, the fact that he has a cell paper, those are not really value added. Those are not things that people see as direct value in industry, because that doesn't solve my problem. If I have a problem where I need you to do this one thing, and you say, "Well, I don't know how to do that, but I went to Harvard," that still doesn't solve my problem. What I would advise him to do is to do a deep search and see. I would challenge this notion that um, that his skills are not needed. There might be companies focusing on some very niche specific things that will need his skills. If he finds that that's not the case, what I would encourage him to do is find things that he is interested in, identify what that skill gap is, and then go do a postdoc where he will fill that skill gap. After that postdoc, then he can go into industry.
Speaking of postdocs, I've heard this a couple of times, and maybe you can demystify it for me. I heard from several people that a better moment to do a transition is after a PhD directly, rather than doing one or two postdocs, because the reasoning being you're slowly getting, overqualified, or whatever that word means.
Mm. Yeah.
But I mean, you're a living proof that you can do a postdoc and another postdoc and then land a job in industry and then be quite successful there. So maybe just tell me, what do you think about this notion? Is it absolutely wrong? Is
Yeah,
it a little bit wrong?
I don't think most of the time when people make generalizations like this, I don't think it's ever absolutely wrong. It's all context dependent, and so I would say that in this case it depends on the discipline that you're studying, and I would say in things almost the majority of things outside of the life sciences, that's probably true, because when you do a postdoc, you're not necessarily gaining new skills if you're not in the life sciences, because they're not lab based. In the life sciences, first of all, a PhD is a requirement for a role as a scientist. So you're already coming in having met the requirements. You're not perceived as academic, as long as you communicate effectively. A postdoc is not necessarily considered as, oh, I did this because I want to become a professor. A postdoc can very often be, well, I went deeper on this topic, I learned some additional skills. And so I I don't think that there's a magical time to apply to industry. It kind of just depends on your skill set. If you have a skill set that's highly competitive and you already know you want to be in industry, just go ahead and do it after you get your PhD. If you thought you wanted to be a professor like I did, and it turns out academia wasn't for you, and that's the time you want to make your transition, if you have a competitive skill set, you can do that. And I just, in our industry, I have not seen recruiters say, oh, you did a postdoc, why do you want to go into industry now if you did a postdoc? And if they do, it's probably because they don't understand something. And what I would say to them is, oh, yeah, in the life sciences, a postdoc is not indicative of wanting to become a professor. This was about upskilling. And I got the skills that I needed. And besides, this is a pivot anyway. So I know what I'm signing up for here. And what I've found is that, based on my experiences in academia, sometimes it takes some time to figure out what you do and don't want. And now I've seen that that's not for me, this is. And that's how you address it.
What are some good places to start searching for these positions? You know, Sometimes they pop out to me on LinkedIn, or they pop out on
Mhm.
ResearchGate, or I don't even know. Sometimes I see ads for jobs. But when I was looking for a PhD position, mostly I just went to every university and narrowed down to PIs that are interesting to me from every country that was interesting to me. And then I just ended up with a list of 20 people who are a 90% match. and then I ordered them in 3 bins, and I said, these are my dream positions, and these are the positions I would be happy with. And then these are if I don't want to be hungry for the next 5 years, but I want to do a PhD. And then I started applying. It was very time consuming to just narrow down the whole thing and read everybody's publications and think about, I only read the people that I actually was interested in, but still very time consuming while writing my master's thesis and so on. Is there a centralized place or the most centralized place where you can look for jobs in the industry?
So you're asking specifically about industry jobs, not postdocs, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So to what I use is LinkedIn exclusively. I've tried some other places. I know Indeed posts jobs. I didn't know ResearchGate did, but what I found is that LinkedIn is the single place where my clients have been most effective in finding jobs. I know Google also has some job postings and things like that. It's a little bit challenging to use. I still think LinkedIn's the best for that.
Any tips on how to filter for positions?
Yeah.
Because I know LinkedIn has a bunch of advanced filtering options, right?
Yeah. So don't have your job search be based on the title. Have it be based on your skills. So if you just Google Boolean searches for LinkedIn, it's very simple. And so suppose I had done next generation sequencing and spatial biology. Just put NGS and spatial and then search. And then if there's a particular geographic location, add that geographic location and what radius of that you're willing to travel outside of. It's very, very simple. The challenge is adjusting the filters and the search terms so that instead of getting either 5 or 3,000 results, you get like 50. If you can get 50 results, you can actually read those and see, okay, of these 50 results, which one am I a 80% match for? Probably 5 of them, probably at least 5. And then you keep doing that. You keep using different searches and you keep iterating until you say, oh, you know what? It seems that every time I do these searches, it seems that these are converging on this particular title. It seems that these are converging on these particular companies. Now you know where to focus. And I run all my clients through that. It's generally it's an exercise that takes them usually about 5 hours and takes me usually 3 to 5 hours to analyze. But then once it's out, they have a very clear roadmap. But these are all things that you can do on your own. It's just a question of how much time and effort do you want to put into it? How much discovery do you want to do? Do you want to do the R&D of this process, or do you want to have someone else do it for you? That's all.
So then we come to the point of this is very time consuming and can be substantial effort. And then, of course, someone who has been further down the road, such as yourself, can help you speed it up. So you don't have to do it for 12 months. You can do it in 3 months or a little bit more. And this is what your company, Trulitica, does. If I were, a client, and I might be, I don't know, maybe I'm just networking here. I don't know. If I were a client, let's say in 3 years, I say, God damn it, I'm not into this academia thing. I think I want to transition, and I want to start planning my transition to industry. And I get back to you. I go to Trulitica. I become a client. How does coaching or a program 12-step look like for someone who's going through your coaching? What would you work on? So I become,
you can just start over if you want.
Yeah. So never mind. So if I were to become, a client of Trulitica and I want to transition to industry, and let's say I have a 12 months or 6 months period, how would we go about those coaching sessions or courses? What would be the roadmap for me as a client of yours?
Yeah. So the very first thing I start off with is an introductory call, just so I can make sure I understand what are your needs, what do you want, what have you tried, what do you think your major gaps are, and are you focusing on the things that are within my skill set to help you with? Usually by the time people find me, they've already kind of answered those questions for themselves, and and most of the time it is a good fit. If it is a good fit, then the very first thing we do after that is we do a 1-hour call where you just tell me your scientific narrative. And it's very much like a podcast, except nobody's listening but me. and I interview them. I
Oh,
just
trust
ask
me,
them
it's
questions. Tell
exactly
me
like
how,
this podcast.
yeah. I go, tell me about your scientific journey. Tell me about all the things you went through. What did you like? What did you not like? And very often that helps me understand their exact skills, but it also helps them understand their story. And that becomes very valuable down the road when they go to interviews because now they have all these examples of stories. Sometimes what I'll find is that they'll bring up things that they did that they had forgotten about. They'll say, "Oh yeah, that's right. We did work on that one project where I learned how to do this, that, and the other thing. But then we abandoned that project after 6 months. But I learned so much. They just that's not in their narrative. They forgot, and that's important. It's a valuable skill. So we generally do that. Helps me get to know the client better. It helps them get to know themselves better, and there's this sort of unintentional result of it being really therapeutic and building trust. And so that's really important because I need to be able to trust my clients, they need to be able to trust me. Next step is I have them send me over what they have so far as a CV, and I have them make sure to include that very granular list of skills. And so then what I do is on the back end, I test several different Boolean search terms and document how many hits I got and narrow it down to the best terms that end up producing a manageable number of hits. I then send that back over to them and I have them execute those terms with some guidance from me. They send that back over to me. I do a bunch of analysis on it to narrow down what should our main searches be that we set LinkedIn alerts for, what companies should you focus on. Very often they'll have a list of maybe 15 companies to focus on, and that's too many. So I'll take that and I'll do some financial due diligence on them, just in terms of if they're publicly traded, how's their stock performance? If they're not publicly traded, when was the last time they got funding from investors? What's their layoff track record? So then that way, if we have 15 companies and 5 of them are very, very low risk, we'll focus on those 5. So then they'll get a summary report from me. We'll go over it together and I'll actually narrow down which departments they should network with. And then we'll set up a session together where I say, okay, I'm going to suppose you want to network with people at AbbVie. There's like 5,000 people who work at AbbVie. How do you find out which 10 people you should reach out to? So we'll get on LinkedIn together and I'll show them how to do all the filtering and we'll walk through it together. And then we'll do examples together of, well, how do we reach out to them? What do you have in common with them? What should we say? And I go through those exercises. And this speaks to your question of how do you teach someone to network? I wish I had like a PDF I could send you that would teach you how to network. I don't. So we have to go through it together. It's very much an art. But as we practice this more and more and more, they get better at it, become independent. Then we work on resumes together. I spend time with them, usually over several 1-hour sessions until we really narrow down what's the value that they're bringing to the table. Now they can leverage that resume with the networking they've been doing. On the side there, we work on optimizing their LinkedIn profile so that it's really clear and consistent what value they're bringing to a particular company. So what I often say is that this is not about becoming an influencer. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is be clear about the value you're bringing and communicate in terms that businesses understand. So we do that. And then generally, we continue doing that and troubleshooting and staying in contact until they get to the interview stage. What I tell them is once you get to the interview stage, tell me immediately. What we're going to do is set up a mock interview before you get to this real interview. And based on the job description and your resume and how well I know you, I'm going to ask you questions that I think they'll ask you. And I'm going to be very, I'm going to challenge you a lot. And then after we do that interview, all of which is recorded, I then give them a feedback session of, okay, here's how I would approach this. You spent a little bit too long talking about this. For this one, you disqualified yourself by saying this. You don't have to disqualify yourself. You could have stopped that answer sooner. Very often PhDs will give a perfect answer and then they'll keep talking. You don't have to, you can just stop talking and you'll be fine. So
Oh,
we
really?
do that. And then
That's
inevitably,
possible.
it's possible.
That's
Yeah.
something I could use.
Inevitably, they get to yeah, no kidding. I mean, I'm sitting here, I've been talking for an hour and a half. Um,
All good. All good.
inevitably they get a job offer.
Hmm.
Once they get the job offer, then we start doing some research on what's a good offer. And so I work with them on how to leverage data that's already out there and teach them what is negotiating. And a joke I make is like, it's not what they show you in Hollywood. It's not talking fast and wearing a suit. It's not all these stereotypes. It's just data, collaboration, and discussion. And at the end, they get their offer, and there's like so many little things that I work with my clients on, just in terms of terminology and phrasing and follow-ups. When's it appropriate to follow up? How long should my email be? So what I found is really helpful in this entire process is having a dedicated platform for my clients so that they can access me. Because, I get a lot of emails, I get a lot of DMs. I want them to have exclusive access to me. And so I've created a Slack channel, and they all have access to each other too, which is really cool. We do once a week calls where we get on Zoom and we just chat about things. It's to me, it's about community. That's one thing that both graduate students, postdocs, and people in the industrial world are lacking. On the grad student and postdoc side, for whatever reason, people don't feel comfortable sharing the challenges they're going through. And everybody puts on this facade that they're doing so well and they're so productive. And it's just such a competitive environment. And sometimes they have PIs that aren't great and they just don't have a place to talk about it where they feel safe. Um, and because in my community, two people are in the same lab or even necessarily in the same university, they can speak about these things openly. We have community standards in terms of how we treat each other. And on the industrial side, it's not uncommon to get laid off. It happens. And I think really the heart-wrenching part about it is that you'll spend 3 years working with someone every day, and you'll build these relationships where you feel so close to them. Then you get laid off, and then it's like you vanished. It's like you never existed, and it's not intentional. It's just that you don't see them anymore, and it just feels like you've lost a part of yourself. And so what's, I think, unique about this community is that that's never going to happen, and it's not subscription based. Once you're in for life. And so these are long-term connections where people really genuinely get to know each other and help each other. I've had clients get jobs and then help other clients out. So it's really cool.
Awesome. One more thing that I wanted to ask, and I forgot because that's what I love doing. I love saying two things, and then I say the first thing and forget about the second thing. Now I remember the second thing. And before I go completely into the blue, because I'm more and more looking like a stripper, I want to ask you, you pointed out some key differences. You pointed out some key differences between academia and industry when it comes to CVs, when it comes to networking, when it comes to all of these negotiating. For example, it exists in industry.
Yeah.
What about interviews? What about interviews? Is there one or two or three things that are super different in industry than in academia?
Yeah. So I would say time again. One of the big mistakes I made in one of my interviews is that I only got through like 3/4 of my talk after an hour, and then we had to stop, and that reflected poorly on me. I think the other part is just being clear and concise with your answers. Generally, if somebody asks you, tell me about yourself, I wouldn't spend more than 2 minutes answering that question. It's not an invitation to spend 15 minutes talking about where you grew up. Just different. I think it's hard for me to make a comparison of what it's like in academia because I've only interviewed in academia once or twice, I guess. The third postdoc I got was very informal. The guy already knew me. I just went and talked to him, chatted with him kind of informally. He's like, oh, yeah, sure. So I don't know what typical academic interviews are like. I'm not sure.
I guess the main rule here would be keep it efficient and, again, stay in that mindset that these people have a problem and they have their own stuff to do for the rest of the day. And the more efficient you can be and clear and concise with your answers, that would be an advantage, right? Rather than talking.
I do think it's important also to. Yeah, I do think it's important to have a strong elevator pitch, and that really is the tell me about yourself. It's in 60 to 120 seconds. You tell someone about what your background is, what your major accomplishments are, and that needs to be relevant to the role. Don't talk about major accomplishments that are not related. And I think also a really, really important thing is to have good questions. And those questions need to be focused on the company, not on you. So examples would be, tell me about some of the major challenges you're facing in this business unit. Tell me where you see the direction of the team going in the next few months. What are some of the if you had X amount of dollars to spend on additional equipment, what would you get? Those are all things that help you understand what you're signing up for. And the better your questions are, the more likely you are to be advanced to the next round. Just in general, asking 2 or 3 really good questions is so much more valuable than giving 2 or 3 really good answers. That's just been my experience.
That's a good sentence to close on. I like that a lot. Ali, where can people find you? Where can people follow you in your company, in your work, and how can they reach out?
Right now, they can find me on LinkedIn. They can send me a connection request or send me a DM. They could also visit my website, trulitica.com. And in the next few months, I will be opening a account on X. So they will be able to find me there as well.
So now officially nobody's calling it Twitter anymore. Okay, that's
I
fair.
don't know. I don't know.
The, the,
Like
the
I would
transition.
rather call it Twitter. I would rather call it Twitter. It's just, to me, it's so weird to call something X, because X is like the definition of a variable. Like, why are we calling it X? Call it something else, please. How am I supposed to talk about math and science and use the word X and have people know what I mean?
All right. Ali, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful hour and a half. I hope it was a pleasure for you as well. I'm sure it was. Look at
Of
me. I'm blue
course,
as a Twitter, right?
you're a pleasure, Keenan.
Yeah,
Especially with your
thank you.
changing lighting.
Yeah. Anyway, a pleasure talking to you, Ali, and I hope this was only the first time of the many times we will talk in the future. Not for a podcast, but maybe in person, maybe through a Zoom, maybe I become a client. I don't know. Everybody follow Ali on LinkedIn and go to his website and to his company page. He has a lot of value to offer, even for free. And if you're interested in transitioning to industry, he's one of the right people for you. Right. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks so much,
And
Keenan.